The moment she stepped onto our porch, something felt off. Not just the usual annoying visitor kind of off, but the kind that makes your gut twist, the kind that warns you trouble is coming. My wife stayed planted firmly while I filmed from behind the screen door, hard hammering. Her voice carried authority, but nothing she said added up. Anyone waving papers that look official yet can't answer a single question is a red flag. I've never felt so trapped on my own property. Let me know in the comments if you think we handled it right, because I'm still not sure. I never expected the woman pounding on our door about a lake inspection would end up being the one hiding a federal warrant. It was a perfect Saturday morning at the lake, but something about the way this stranger moved across the porch didn't sit right. It too calculated, too rehearsed. I was inside making coffee when voices began to rise. The tone made me freeze, that prickling sense of urgency you feel before you fully understand why. Rachel faced the woman, Diane Mercer, our 45-year-old HOA president. Both women looked like warriors bracing for battle. Diane waved a stack of papers around like they were weapons. But the grip on them was too tight, almost desperate, as if one gust of wind would reveal a secret. "I'm not letting you inside this cabin," Rachel said, her voice sharp and steady, the kind of firmness reserved for door-to-door salespeople trying to sell something you absolutely do not want. I whispered from behind the door, unsure about the situation, but Rachel didn't flinch or glance back. She crossed her arms, eyes locked on Diane, radiating the quiet confidence of someone who knows they're right. The papers Diane held looked like they'd been printed on standard office paper, full of obvious errors even from my vantage point. She kept insisting they were emergency cabin inspection documents for lake safety violations. But everything about her delivery screamed practice-y, like she'd rehearsed this moment for some time. Rachel had 3 years' experience working as a county property paperwork checker before we moved to the lake. She knew what legitimate documents looked like, the kind of paper, the stamps, everything. When she said Diane had no authority to inspect our cabin, I saw a flicker of panic cross Diane's face before she masked it again with aggression. Our cabin had been sitting on this lake for 15 years. Built with all proper permits and inspections. Yet Diane pointed at everything like it was a hazard that needed official condemnation. She labeled our perfectly legal dock a community safety violation. Rachel stayed calm, explaining that the property records in our name confirmed ownership long before the HOA existed. I noticed Diane's hands trembling slightly, her weight shifting nervously. Then things escalated as she tried to push past Rachel to peek inside, as if she had some legal right to enter without permission. Rachel stood firm, blocking the doorway like a bouncer, refusing to budge. I finally stepped outside, still recording, and demanded she leave immediately. But it wasn't just a simple dispute anymore. When Rachel showed our deed, official seals and county stamps included, Diane didn't back down. She shouted over our proof, insisting the cabin was unsafe and needed inspection, calling our legitimate deed fake while clutching her obviously forged papers. Diane eventually stormed to her car, muttering about violations and standards, papers gripped like sacred texts. Rachel and I watched, stunned, knowing this was far from over. Something darker than fake paperwork was unfolding. By Monday, Diane had declared all-out war. Bright orange unsafe cabin notices plastered our front door, almost covering it entirely. Though cheap and obviously homemade, they looked official enough to attract neighbors' attention. Rachel removed them quickly, but the posts on the neighborhood app exploded with Diane's dramatic warnings and photos of our dock. The situation escalated further when Diane returned with a tape measure and clipboard, documenting our property like she had authority. Rachel verified with the county no inspection requests, no record of Diane Mercer representing them. It was confirmed, she was impersonating a county official. I knew proving ownership to the neighbors would be tough, so I posted a blurred photo of our deed on the app, keeping details private but showing that we had the legal right to the property. Our family had owned this lake and cabin for decades, all properly documented with the county. Within an hour of posting proof online, my post had been reported multiple times by anonymous users and buried at the bottom of the feed, while Diane's posts about safety violations stayed pinned at the top, gathering more comments and shares every hour. It felt rigged, like she had people manipulating the conversation for her. The neighborhood was split exactly as I expected. some blindly believing Diane's warnings, assuming that if someone who looked official said there was a problem, there must be one. The others questioned why the HOA president suddenly cared about our cabin when other similar properties weren't being targeted. A few neighbors even asked to see her credentials, which only made Diane's posts increasingly defensive and hostile. Our once peaceful lake community was turning into a battlefield. Then things took a stranger turn, one that made me suspect Diane might be threatening people behind the scenes. Owen Parker, a neighbor who had initially questioned Diane's authority and supported us, suddenly switched sides after a private conversation with her. His comments went from cautious skepticism to fervent warnings about community safety overnight, as if someone had flipped a switch in his brain. What could she possibly have said to change him so completely? Looking back, I suspect she was threatening legal consequences or HOA fines, but at the time I had no proof and Owen wouldn't talk to me. All I knew was that someone who had seemed reasonable had become hostile. Wednesday evening, an anonymous note appeared wedged in our cabin doorframe, like a scene from a thriller. It was a blurry photocopy with 3 barely legible words: failure to appear. Whoever left it knew something serious about Diane enough to warn USA, but not enough courage to come forward directly. The handwriting was disguised, the paper cheap, printed from a home printer. Was this a warning, or a setup? The timing was too precise, coinciding with Diane's escalating harassment. Rachel discovered the note first, holding it inside as if it might explode. "Daniel, what if she's planning something bigger than fake inspections?" she asked, visibly stressed after days of relentless harassment. I stared at the blurry message, wondering if it referred to a court document, a legal notice, or a warrant that Diane had ignored. Clearly, someone knew Diane's skeletons of serious legal problems that might explain her aggressive attempts to assert false authority over our property, but they weren't willing to reveal them directly. That night, I lay awake thinking about Owen's sudden shift and the cryptic warning, trying to piece together Diane's real agenda. Was whoever left the note trying to help us, or put us in danger? Either way, I sensed we were about to find out. Thursday brought a development that made everything so far seem minor. Around noon, Diane returned, but this time with backup. She brought 2 other HOA board members I barely recognized, and Owen Parker trailing behind, looking like part of some official delegation. They approached our cabin carrying a ladder, tools, and what looked like legitimate inspection equipment, which made me second-guess everything Rachel had told me about the papers being fake. Diane had clearly organized this expedition meticulously, and seeing 4 people arriving with serious intent made my stomach sink. Owen initially supported Diane, nodding as she declared they were conducting an emergency cabin compliance inspection under HOA powers. A nervous-looking older board member glanced around uneasily, while another woman seemed confident but kept checking her phone as if following a strict protocol. I remembered a neighbor mentioning fines for other cabins, and I wondered if there really was some community-wide initiative we'd missed. Then Diane crossed every line I thought existed in neighbor disputes. She climbed onto our deck without permission, inspecting the exterior walls and prying at boards, claiming structural violations that posed immediate safety risks. Rachel came outside as Diane tried to peer into windows, fury building in her face. The 2 board members grew visibly uncomfortable, realizing they'd been dragged into something beyond normal HOA business. The nervous man finally asked who authorized the inspection. Diane dismissed him with talk of emergency safety protocols, but when pressed for actual documents, her mask slipped briefly before she erupted in an angry rant about endangering the community. This was the first real disagreement Rachel and I had about how to handle the situation. I suggested letting them conduct the fake inspection just to end the ordeal, thinking it might satisfy Diane. Rachel looked at me like I'd suggested handing over the keys to her house, insisting that giving in now would mean she'd never stop. She was right. Our argument in front of the neighbors was humiliating, but it helped me see that Rachel's instincts were better than mine. While we argued, I noticed Owen pacing and checking his watch, growing more agitated. When one board member asked him why the inspection was necessary, he gave vague, unconvincing answers. Then something important happened. When I mentioned we'd already verified with the county that no inspection was requested, Owen's face went pale, and he backed toward his car like he had just realized something terrible. That evening, I began digging into Diane's background. Internet searches revealed she had previously used the name Diane Mills, always positioning herself as an authority figure with official-looking papers. An old newspaper article mentioned a Diane Mills who had left town abruptly after a financial controversy involving homeowner assessments. Suddenly, her behavior started to make sense. The anonymous note, the sudden shift in Owen, Diane's aggressive inspection, it all pointed to something much darker than a simple HOA dispute. Officer Martinez arrived about 20 minutes later, slowly assessing the situation. Diane rushed to him, waving her stack of forged inspection papers, pointing at our cabin like she was reporting a crisis. Diane waved her papers at our doc with exaggerated concern, detailing her so-called violations with the practiced confidence of someone who'd run this performance countless times. Terms like community endangerment and structural violations flew as she pointed to completely legal areas of our property, treating them like ticking time bombs. Officer Martinez listened patiently, taking notes and flipping through her papers, his expression polite but guarded, clearly not buying into her narrative. I realized it was time to stop passively recording and present our side before Diane controlled the story entirely. I stepped outside with Rachel, carrying our property deed and the photos I had taken of her trespassing on our deck. "Officer, I'm Daniel Carter," I said, keeping my voice calm. "This woman has been harassing us with forged documents, claiming authority to inspect our cabin." I handed over our deed and pointed out the obvious spelling errors in her papers. Diane had been trespassing and claiming to represent the county. Rachel joined me, calmly explaining her experience as a former county property paperwork checker. She detailed how legitimate inspection documents should look and pointed out the ways Diane's papers were clearly fakey, crooked stamps, cheap paper, nothing issued by any county office. We confirmed with the county the day before, no inspection request existed for our property, and no record showed Diane Mercer was authorized to act on their behalf. As Officer Martinez compared our professional documents with Diane's amateur forgeries, her confidence began to crumble. He asked pointed questions she couldn't answer convincingly. "Ma'am, these inspection papers don't match the county's format," he said, holding them up, "and according to these records, Mr. and Mrs. Carter owned this lake and cabin. You're trespassing by coming onto their property without permission." Diane tried to interrupt, insisting on the dangers to the community, but Martinez focused on the evidence. Then it happened, the moment her elaborate scheme started unraveling. Officer Martinez's expression shifted to the one cops wear when a simple neighbor dispute turns into something more serious. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm, "these aren't just unofficial documents, they're forged county papers, which is a crime." Diane went pale as he continued. "According to property records, the Carters own this lake and cabin legally, and you've been impersonating a county official while trespassing." Officer Martinez asked for her ID to verify her identity. As he walked back to his patrol car to run her information, Diane visibly panicked, glancing at her car, checking her watch, muttering about misunderstandings. Rachel and I watched, absorbing how quickly an neighbor dispute had escalated to potential criminal charges. When he returned, Martinez's demeanor had shifted completely. He addressed Diane formally. "Miss Mercer, I need you to step over here, please." Diane froze, calculating her next move. Then came the thunderbolt. "You currently have an active warrant for fraud from your previous state." Her face grumbled. The warrant had been issued 18 months ago for defrauding homeowners via fake HOA assessments, and she'd been a fugitive ever since. Martinez continued, calm and professional. "Miss Mills, you're under arrest for failure to appear on felony fraud charges. Additional charges for forgery and impersonation will also apply." I could barely contain my ladder. Finally, the truth about Diane Mills, now calling herself Mercer, came to light. She had fled a previous community after scamming homeowners with fake assessments and emergency repairs, collecting thousands of dollars. Her obsession with establishing fake authority over our cabin now made perfect sense. Neighbors began gathering as the arrest unfolded in broad daylight. Diane's carefully constructed mask slipped for a brief moment. She cried, claiming she just wanted to belong and never intended harm. But within seconds, her manipulative anger returned, screaming about conspiracies and blaming us for setting her up. Word spread rapidly through the neighborhood. Messages from embarrassed neighbors who had supported Diane's fake safety campaign poured in. Owen Parker appeared at our door within 30 minutes, devastated, explaining how she had manipulated him into supporting her. Rachel delivered the perfect line as we watched Diane handcuffed and placed in the patrol car. "Well," she said dryly, "the cabin inspections are finished, and we found exactly what needed to be found." I burst out laughing, realizing she had perfectly summarized the situation as our tormentor was arrested for multiple felonies. Officer Martinez searched Diane's vehicle before taking her to the county jail. Inside, he discovered a notebook listing neighbors' names with dollar amounts next to each entry, as she had planned to target expensive properties in the community with fake violations. The notebook contained copies of official county letterhead and contact information for other towns she considered scamming if this plan failed. She had built the trip and got caught in it herself. I watched the patrol car disappear with Diane inside, realizing just how close our community had come to a large-scale financial scam. The mood in the community meeting was tense, less about the actual crimes Diane had committed and more about the embarrassment of having been duped. Two families insisted that there still must be something wrong with our cabin structure and demanded that we publicly display our deed and permits for everyone to scrutinize. "Just because she's a criminal doesn't mean there aren't real safety issues," one argued, apparently unable to admit they'd been completely wrong and had supported harassment against their neighbors. Their refusal to accept the truth added fresh tension to an already strained room, where people were grappling with the realization of their collective mistake and trying to figure out how to rebuild trust. As expected, the community response split. Some rallied behind us, recognizing we were the victims of a criminal scheme, while others, humiliated at having been fooled, wanted to quietly move on without acknowledging their errors. About half the room seemed genuinely relieved that the real criminal had finally been caught, while the others struggled to confront their role in enabling her. Some neighbors expressed gratitude, thanking us for standing up to a calculated fraud that could have financially devastated multiple families. Yet, others seemed more upset that the situation had turned into a legal mess instead of being handled neighborly. A few even suggested we should have let Diane carry out her bogus inspection to avoid the drama, completely overlooking the fact that doing so would have allowed her to scam the entire community with fake emergency fees and false repair claims. Agent Johnson shared that federal investigators had uncovered evidence pointing to a far-reaching criminal operation, with Diane's schemes extending well beyond our neighborhood. Preliminary findings revealed that she had already collected early cabin maintenance fees from 3 families under the guise of her fake inspection authority, promising that early payment would reduce future costs once a supposed community-wide safety project was implemented. Federal prosecutors intended to pursue full restitution for all victims, plus additional damages for harassment and defamation, meaning our community could recover significant funds lost to her scheme. Some families who had paid her were embarrassed to admit they'd been scammed, while others were frustrated at having to wait for the federal investigation to unravel the full scope of the fraud. By the end of the meeting, the community passed a unanimous resolution introducing strict verification procedures for any future HOA business, including requiring multiple signatures and public documentation for all official communications and fee assessments. Owen volunteered to serve as the new HOA treasurer, committing to transparent accounting audited quarterly by an independent firm. Several other neighbors stepped up to help restore trust in the HOA with open book policies. The interim board president announced that all citations Diane had issued would be removed and any collected fees returned immediately, pending the federal investigation. As people filed out of the community center, tension and embarrassment lingered, but there was also relief that the truth was finally out. The next morning, Rachel mailed Diane's own inspection notice back to her jail cell along with a copy of our property deed and a note that read simply, "Inspection complete. Violations found." It felt like the perfect conclusion to the nightmare. Looking around the room, seeing neighbors who had turned on each other because of a criminal's lies, I realized justice was worth the temporary division. Returning to our cabin and gazing at the lake we had defended, I knew we had made the right choice. Protecting our community from real criminals mattered more than preserving a false sense of peace with those unwilling to face reality. In the end, The only person who truly needed inspecting was Diane herself, and we had conducted the most thorough background check our neighborhood had ever seen. 6 months later, Rachel and I sat in federal court watching Diane Mills walk in wearing an orange jumpsuit, looking completely different from the aggressive HOA president who had terrorized our neighborhood. Months in jail had worn her down, and her defeated demeanor went beyond physical changes. Her public defender, a weary woman in her 50s, shuffled papers while quietly explaining the process. We expected a routine plea hearing, Diane accepting responsibility for fraud, forgery, and impersonation in exchange for a reduced sentence. Agent Johnson had prepared us. She would likely face 18 to 24 months in federal prison plus full restitution to victims. But as the judge called the case, Diane shocked everyone by interrupting her attorney and speaking directly to the court. "Your Honor, I need to tell them about the others," she said, ignoring the visible surprise on her lawyer and Agent Johnson's face. She claimed she had accomplices in the community who had helped her plan and target expensive properties. The courtroom went silent. She explained that 2 HOA board members had fed her information on property values, insurance coverage, and which families were most likely to pay fake assessments. Her testimony revealed a methodical, local fraud scheme far more organized than anyone had imagined. These board members weren't naive bystanders. They actively helped her gather financial information to determine how much they could extract. Diane described plans to claim our dock was an environmental hazard and demand $50,000 from every lakefront property owner. Our cabin had been her test case, designed to prove that her intimidation and fake paperwork strategy could manipulate even the most cautious homeowners. If we had given in, she would have moved on to every family on the lake. Agent Johnson signaled federal officers outside the courtroom, and within minutes, the 2 board members who had aided Diane were taken into custody. Watching people we recognized from neighborhood meetings being arrested in federal court was surreal. The older man who had accompanied Diane looked terrified, while the woman who had resigned after the initial arrests maintained the same calm, confident facade she had during her fake apologies. Diane's complete breakdown came as she realized her confession had destroyed not only her life but the lives of those who had helped her. Diane's fury finally spilled over, her composure completely shattered. "I just wanted what they had," she screamed at Rachel and me, voice cracking. "These people with their lakes and perfect lives, so why shouldn't I take some of that? Why should you get to own an entire lake while others struggle to pay their bills?" The judge had to restore order as Diane ranted about economic inequality and perceived injustice, but her words exposed the jealousy and entitlement that had driven her crimes from the very start. With Diane's confession of the conspiracy complete and federal investigators interviewing her accomplices separately, the legal consequences skyrocketed. She was no longer facing the 18 to 24 months initially offered for individual fraud charges. Instead, she was staring down extended prison time for orchestrating a multi-state criminal conspiracy with multiple participants. The judge postponed sentencing for at least 6 months while authorities investigated the full scope of the scheme and identified additional victims and accomplices. "This case has clearly expanded beyond individual fraud charges," the judge explained. Leaving the courthouse, Rachel and I felt a mix of vindication and disbelief. Our quiet lakeside community would never be the same after learning it had been infiltrated by a calculated criminal operation. "I can't believe we lived next to people planning to rob us for months," Rachel said, shaking her head. Driving home, I realized that our victory might only be the beginning. How many other whole communities nationwide could be under similar schemes? And what could we do to protect them from the same kind of systematic fraud? 2 years later, our first annual Honest Lake Day was everything I had hoped it would be. 40 neighbors gathered on our private beach, children splashing safely while parents enjoyed barbecue and conversation free from the tension that had poisoned our community during Diane's scheme. The fake inspection notices were gone, replaced by a simple "Welcome to Carter Lake" sign, acknowledging our ownership while inviting everyone to enjoy the water responsibly. Rachel and I opened the lake to the entire community every summer as a way to heal and foster neighborhood connections that Diane had tried to destroy. Justice was ultimately served in ways beyond our expectations. 18 months after Diane's confession, federal court sentenced her to 4 years in prison, with full restitution to all families affected. covering both money collected and damages for harassment, defamation, and emotional distress. The 2 board members who aided her received 2-year sentences for conspiracy to commit fraud. All 3 defendants were also fined, with funds allocated to new playground equipment and community improvements. Diane's house was sold by court order, and a young family moved in, restoring life and laughter to a property once used as the headquarters for her criminal operation. The community's recovery was remarkable. Owen Parker became our HOA president with strict transparency rules, 3 signatures required and public posting for any expenditure over $100. The community app enforced verification for official announcements, and monthly meetings included detailed financial reports with receipts accessible to anyone who wanted them. New residents received packets explaining the prior fraud and the safeguards now in place. Rachel and I emerged stronger as a couple. Our trust and communication deepened through navigating the ordeal. During our 2nd annual Lake Day, I reminded her, "You saved our community from systematic fraud by refusing to back down when it would have been easier to give in." The financial resolution exceeded expectations, with full restitution to all victims and additional funds for harassment damages. This enabled upgrades to our playground, community center, and landscaping, transforming the neighborhood into something better than before the conspiracy. Media coverage brought our story nationwide, featuring us in news segments and HOA publications as a cautionary tale about verifying authority and demanding proper documentation. The ripple effect extended to policy changes and increased awareness about HOA fraud, uncovering similar schemes in 6 other states and leading to further arrests and recovered funds. Our case became a training example for law enforcement, highlighting how criminals exploit HOA leadership to commit systematic fraud. As the sun set over the lake during our community celebration, painting the water gold and orange, Rachel raised her bottle in a toast to cabin inspections that actually find what needs to be found. I clinked mine to hers, adding, "and to communities that protect each other from real criminals instead of targeting innocent neighbors." Laughter and applause filled the air, a symbolic healing of the wounds that had divided our community. Children played together freely while parents enjoyed the restored trust and camaraderie of a healthy neighborhood. Looking back, the greatest lesson wasn't just standing up to scammers or catching a fugitive, though that was wild. It was realizing how a community, even shaken and divided, can grow stronger when honesty triumphs over convenience. We didn't just remove a fraudster, we rebuilt something better. So if someone knocks claiming inspection authority, ask for credentials, verify with the real office, and trust your instincts. The loudest voice isn't always the truthful one.